A very warm welcome, everyone, to this event on policy for recovery in Africa, regional development planning and coordination. My name is Bob Dewar, Associate Fellow with the Africa Programme of Chatham House. It's our great pleasure to extend a warm welcome to our distinguished speakers and panelists, and welcome to you, our audience, participating through Zoom, and to those joining via Facebook Live as well. This is part of the Policy for Recovery in Africa series of meetings that Chatham House Africa Programme has been holding in partnership with the UNDP, which brings together expert speakers and decision makers to examine and exchange views on key challenges, potential solutions and approaches for implementation as African countries confront and aim to bounce back from the shocks of the COVID-19 pandemic. The series provides analysis and evidence-based policy towards recovery and towards the SDGs and the African Union's Agenda 2063. Welcome firstly to our distinguished speakers. That's Ambassador Mamman Nuhu, Executive Secretary, the Lake Chad Basin Commission, and Head of Mission of the Multilateral Joint Task Force, who will make the keynote address. And this will be followed by a panel discussion conducted by three distinguished speakers. Firstly, Jide Okeke, coordinator of the Regional Programme for Africa for UNDP. And thank you again to UNDP for your partnership today and in this series. Also on the panel, Mr. Ali Rahim, Practice Manager, Social Sustainability and Inclusion, West Africa of the World Bank. And Ulla Andren, Head of Regional Development Cooperation in Africa, the Swedish International Development Agency, SIDA. We're delighted to have you all with us. And the panelists will be speaking right after our keynote speakers, I said, and they'll no doubt perhaps pick up some of the themes also and probe some of the themes that he brings forward. And their contributions will be followed by a Q&A session with you, the audience, for the remainder of the event. A few words on housekeeping. All the biographies of our distinguished speakers and panelists will be shared via the Zoom chat box. The event will be held in English and in French with simultaneous interpretation throughout, and participants may use the interpretation function in the Zoom control bar at the bottom of your screen to select your preferred language. All attendees will be muted during the presentations, but can use the raise hand function, also at the bottom of your screen, to ask your question and to do so live. So please use the raise hand function. But of course, apologies in advance if we're not able to enable everyone to ask a question this time. And Zoom participants may also submit written questions through the Q&A box throughout the event. And please do that. But as I say, the raise hand function we do recommend. Unfortunately, we're not able to take questions from participants joining us through Facebook Live at this time. Please accept our apologies for that. The event is on the record. It's on the record, which means you can use the information from the event and may identify the speaker and any other participant. Filming and recording are not allowed without prior permission from Chatham House, but you are very welcome. And please do tweet the event using the hashtag #CHAfrica. Now, the theme today, regional development planning and coordination, is critical in any normal circumstances. It's important for the delivery of services and delivery of care and of security to citizens in face of insecurity caused by Boko Haram and others, and the development uncertainties that flow from that and from other underlying issues, including climate change. It's a particularly important theme when you have a large area of the world, like the Lake Chad Basin, several countries impinging directly on it, several more also benefiting from it, all with political capitals a long distance from the area. There are issues of being landlocked, having overlapping regional organizations. And over the last 2 years, the impacts of the COVID pandemic. So what policy is needed for the best recovery, for economic, social, environmental recovery and resilience? The key roles of the Lake Chad Basin Commission and the Multilateral Joint Task Force are very clear. And we're delighted that Ambassador Mamman Nuhu is able to be with us today to kick us off with his keynote speech so that we can launch our discussions. Your Excellency, great to have you with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair of the event, panelists. May I first of all express my appreciation to Chatham House and the UNDP for inviting me to deliver the keynote address at this very important event. As you are aware, my address will be on regional development planning and coordination by the Lake Chad Basin Commission, which we also call LCBC. By my understanding of the topic, I am required essentially to talk about the process of planning and coordination of development projects by the Lake Chad Basin Commission, since that is the organization I lead. Now, to do that, I intend to, first of all, situate the Lake Chad Basin in the world map, introduce the LCBC, which is the body responsible for development planning and coordination in the basin, as well as its mandate. I will also examine the Lake Chad Basin transboundary diagnostic analysis, which identifies the transboundary challenges regarding water and land degradation. I will also explain the place of the strategic action program, which seeks to operationalize the transboundary diagnostic analysis at regional level. Finally, I will present the different project coordination models available to the LCBC and its partners, including some of the projects managed under each of the models. Now, the Lake Chad Basin covers approximately 2,382,000 square kilometers, representing about 8% of the surface area of the African continent. It is shared by Algeria, Cameroon, Central African Republic, Chad, Libya, Niger, Nigeria, Sudan, Algeria, and Libya. The initial conventional basin agreed upon by the founding fathers of the LCBC in 1964 was 437,300 square kilometers. It was increased to 967,000 square kilometers when the Central African Republic became member of the Commission in 1994, and after adjustment to include the upper basin of the Shari Lagoon and the Komadougou Bay. The Lake Chad Basin Commission itself was established by the Forlami Convention of 22nd May 1964 by Nigeria, Cameroon, Chad, and Niger. The Central African Republic joined in 1994 and Libya in 2008 to raise the current membership to 6. Sudan, Egypt, the Republic of Congo, and Democratic Republic of Congo enjoy observer status. Now, the 3 mandates of the LCBC that guide the choice of projects are to manage the waters of the Lake Chad and other transboundary water resources in the Lake Chad Basin in a sustainable and equitable way, to conserve the ecosystem of the conventional basin, and to promote regional integration and safeguard peace and security in the conventional basin. With regard to the transboundary diagnostic analysis, it is the key output of the LCBC and the Global Environmental Facility Program. It focuses on transboundary environmental problems that need to be addressed jointly by the international community and the LCBC member states to reverse the water degradation trends in the basin. The TDA, as we call it, is the basis for the preparation of the strategic action program for its implementation at regional level and the national action plans at individual country levels. The specific objectives of the TDA are identification, quantification, and prioritization of the environmental concerns in the Lake Chad Basin that are transboundary in nature and identification of their root causes. Now, with regard to project coordination models, there are several options for coordination of planned development projects by the Lake Chad Basin Commission and its partners. Some projects are planned and delivered exclusively by the Lake Chad Basin Commission. They include the ongoing emergency development program, which is for the vulnerable people, especially women and children. It is designed to bring about sustainable development through the improvement of the revenue generating activities of the vulnerable segments of the population engaged in primary production, such as crops, livestock, and fisheries production. The project comprises what to be executed within 18 months to improve the living standards of the target population of the region. But due to budgetary constraints, it is being executed piecemeal, depending on availability of funds. Another project that falls under this category, that is the category of those projects that are planned and executed exclusively by the Lake Chad Basin Commission, is the in-depth feasibility study to improve the hydraulic capacity of Lake Chad and its tributaries. The project is to enable more water to reach the lake, thereby contributing to building resilience among the people by restoring their ability to fend for themselves. It involves desilting strategic parts of the main tributaries of the lake, that is Rivers Shari, Logon, and Komadugu Yobe, embankment stabilization, desilting of the lake itself, and removing invasive weeds from the lake to enable it to receive more water from the tributaries. Now, the second model of project implementation is the projects that are planned by partners and with national governments, with a regional window managed by the Lake Chad Basin Commission. They include the World Bank's Lake Chad Basin Development and Recovery Program, or PROLAC, which also includes the strengthening of Nigeria's multi-sectoral crisis recovery project. PROLAC is designed to support and enhance the recovery of the region through crisis monitoring, improving connectivity, and agricultural livelihoods in selected areas of the 4 riparian countries. The project is designed to promote social cohesion, strengthen social inclusion of all groups affected by the crisis, and reinforce trust in local and by responses, placing in capacity, as well as identification and treatment pattern. This program, which is Pro-Development, and its successor, the President, which are financed by the Africa Development Bank and JEF project, respectively. In both cases, the management teams are jointly recruited by the Africa Development Bank and the LCBC, and they report to the Executive Secretary through the Technical Director of the LCBC. A steering committee comprising partners, participating countries, and the LCBC provide the policy direction of the 2 projects. Also in this category is the regional strategy for the stabilization, recovery, and resilience of the areas affected by Boko Haram insurgency. The strategy was produced by the Lake Chad Basin Commission with the support of the African Union Commission and the UNDP. It was validated by the Council of Ministers of the Lake Chad Basin Commission in Abuja on 30th August 2018. The main objectives of the regional stabilization strategy are to generate applicable policies and programs geared towards the short, medium, and long-term stabilization and development of the Lake Chad Basin region and to address the root causes of the crisis in the Lake Chad Basin region to enhance resilience. The RSS, as we call it, is hinged on 9 pillars of intervention and 40 strategic objectives. Each pillar defines the broad scope of work to be undertaken and the strategic objectives to be achieved. Now, I will very quickly go through the 9 pillars. Number one is political cooperation. Number 2 is security and human rights. Number 3 is disarmament, demobilization, rehabilitation, reinsertion, reintegration of persons associated with Boko Haram. The 4th is humanitarian assistance. The 5th is governance and social contract. The 6th is socio-economic recovery and environmental sustainability. The 7th is education, learning, and skills. The 8th is prevention of violent extremism and building peace. And finally, the 9th is empowerment and inclusion of women and youth. As part of the implementation framework, specific initiatives to be undertaken have been captured in territorial action plans produced by the governors of the 8 states and provinces most affected by the Boko Haram insurgency. They are the North and Far North provinces of Cameroon, Lak and Hajer Lamis regions of Chad, the Difa region of Niger, and the Borno, Yobe, and Adamawa states of Nigeria. The next stage in the implementation of the RSS is to embark on a fundraising mission to mobilize the resources to implement the territorial action plans. Also close to the regional stabilization strategy is the Regional Stabilization Facility, which was produced by the UNDP with the support of the Lake Chad Basin Commission and the African Union, and it was launched on July 18th, 2019 in Niamey, Republic of Niger, on the margins of the 2nd annual Lake Chad Governors Forum. It is a stopgap measure to address the immediate needs of the affected people pending the implementation of the regional stabilization strategy. Through the facility, the UNDP is helping to restore social contract between the governments and the affected communities, rebuild trust, improve security and a sense of safety in the communities, enhance access to justice and rule of law, and provide alternative means of livelihood. Also among the projects that are jointly planned and executed with partners, the Lake Chad Governors Forum. Notwithstanding the essential roles that national governments continue to play, it became clear that as a regional crisis, the Lake Chad Basin crisis demands a holistic and regional stabilization response that builds on input and advice from communities and affected populations. A bottom-up approach is urgently needed in recognition of the roles that communities should play in driving the agenda towards stabilization and peace in the affected area. That led to the creation of the Lake Chad Basin Governors Forum. The overall goal of the forum is to promote continuous dialogue and the sharing of information, best practices and lessons learned, and to strengthen coordination and collaboration on cross-border initiatives at the subnational level around the Lake Chad Basin. It is envisaged that such a forum could help leverage peace building and conflict prevention efforts in the Lake Chad Basin and provide a path for lasting peace and sustainable development. In addition, the forum is to ensure that its efforts are consistent, complementary, and aligned with the regional stabilization strategy. The inaugural meeting of the Governors Forum took place in Maiduguri, Nigeria from 8th to 9th May 2018. The second one took place in Niamey, Niger Republic from 16th to 18th July 2019, while the third edition was hosted in Yaoundé, Cameroon from 4th to 5th October 2021. Now the challenges. Some of the most pressing challenges that continue to impede on the capacity of the Lake Chad Basin Commission to adequately deliver, first of all, the ongoing conflicts in the region. The volatility of the region due to the activities of Boko Haram hinders the speedy development of projects and implementation. Another problem, of course, is insufficient funding. The devastation in the region requires huge financial investment for reconstruction and rebuilding of the communities. Inadequate funding to carry out its scheduled programs remain one of the main challenges of the Lake Chad Basin Commission. It is pertinent to underscore that the activities of the Commission are capital intensive and require secured and sustained funding to ensure success. Both national governments, friends of the region, and donors are encouraged to support the efforts in the region. The third challenge is, of course, inadequate human capacity to execute and manage some of its programs. For instance, the regional stabilization strategy and its various components are relatively new areas of engagement for the LCBC, and the challenge of sourcing the requisite manpower to man such specialized components of our programs was evident, although it has now been sorted out. In conclusion, may I reiterate that the LCBC is always seeking partnerships with institutions and organizations that wish to invest in the region. Being a knowledge-based organization that shares best practices among its member countries, the LCBC looks forward to establishing partnerships towards developing policies, ideas, and sustainable projects towards the transformation of the Lake Chad Basin into a viable hub of human development that positively supports the existence of its over 40 million inhabitants. I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. A very useful overview and introduction, and a range of complex, I'd say, projects to manage. And thank you very much for that. Can I ask a quick question, if I may, before passing on to the panelists? The issue of COVID-19, how badly has that affected all that you have been able to do? And going forward, what do you think is the best way to confront this and to be as effective as possible despite the ongoing COVID pandemic?
Yes, COVID-19 has impacted seriously on our ability to deliver, because it affected the incomes of our member countries, and we depend on the contributions of member countries for some of our projects. That wise, yes, the impact has been quite enormous. Last year, the contribution actually hardly came. We just managed to pay salaries, and that was because of the impact. With regard to individuals, it's more like the measures taken to address the COVID-19 pandemic that impacted on the people of the region rather than the COVID itself. The lockdowns, for example, created a lot of tension. We are in a region where people live from hand to mouth. If you lock somebody in the house and tell him not to go out, you will have to look for how to feed him, because he has to go out and walk before he can find what to eat. So that created tension, and you can imagine, the amount of problem that is created. And then farmers also, especially fishermen in the Lake Chad Basin, because of the lockdown, they couldn't, even those of them that live by the side of the lake, they couldn't go to anywhere to sell their catch. They couldn't come to N'Djamena, they couldn't go to Maiduguri, they couldn't go to anywhere. So those are the types of impacts that we had. So, but I believe any support to our government to enable them overcome the economic hardship that was created by COVID-19 will definitely have a more positive impact on the Lake Chad Basin and its ability to deliver. And I said also we are looking for partnerships, for support to enable us implement some of these programs, like the emergency development program that I talked about. We started implementing it in 2016, but because of shortage of funds from our member countries, in some years we don't implement it at all. In other years, we're able to implement a few of the recommendations. But initially, it was intended to be implemented within a period of 18 months. So COVID has had an effect on us, but it's the measures to contain the COVID that had more devastating effect than the COVID itself. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you very much for that. That very, very interesting and helpful answer. Can I now turn to the first of our panelists and invite Mr. Jide Okeke, coordinator of the Regional Programme for Africa of UNDP, to take the microphone. And thank you again, Jide, for this collaboration with UNDP for this series of discussions, and welcome and great that you could be with us. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Bob, and good evening to colleagues elsewhere. I'm dialing from New York, so I would say good morning. As we think about planning, development planning and coordination, one of the questions that have often been raised amongst different constituencies, be it our donors, be it the beneficiaries on the ground, it's usually what's the impact of our programming, what's the impact of our planning, what's the impact of initiatives that we often deploy, especially in crisis setting. So what I'll be doing very briefly today is to demonstrate through an empirical evidence coming out of the work we are doing on stabilization in the Lake Chad, in identifying what we consider to be the impact of our programming. And I would want to first thank Ambassador Nuhu for providing the political leadership that has allowed for this stabilization programming to be deployed. So the simple question that I would try and answer here is whether stabilization is working in the Lake Chad Basin region. And in thinking about stabilization here, I'm narrowly referring to the stabilization, the regional stabilization facility, which Ambassador Nuhu referenced in his presentation, right? And there are three questions that I would seek to answer. Next slide, please. The first is to provide you with an overview of what we consider to be the security situation in the Lake Chad Basin over the last decade. And then to do a comparative analysis between where we are investing on stabilization, what we've called the JAPS location, so Joint Action Plan location, and those areas where we are not investing in the Lake Chad Basin, the non-JAPS location. And on the basis of that, on the basis of the nature of the security situation in these two areas, we can begin to identify some findings and recommendations that can be useful, not just to this current situation, but as we think about future planning and coordination, be it in the context of stabilization, but also in the context of long-term development in the region. If one looks at the security situation over the last 10 years, and next slide, what you would find is that we have seen more violence, but the intensity of the violence on the in the Lake Chad Basin region has been relatively low. So if you look at the conflict events since 2009, they have consistently increased. But fatalities, if you transpose that or associate that with the number of fatalities over the same time zone, we are beginning to see a decrease in the number of fatalities in the region. And that's quite profound. The reason why we saw a spike in 2015 was because of the intensity of Boko Haram attacks, which then led to a renewed mandate, which was authorized by both the LCBC member states, but the African Union as well in 2015, the Multinational Joint Task Force against Boko Haram, which is why you see the high number of fatalities there in 2015. But what does this mean in terms of our JAP locations and where we are invested on stabilization? And by stabilization here, I'm referring to three things. First, we are providing livelihood opportunities to those affected by conflict. Second, we are enhancing community security. And third, we are providing basic infrastructure to communities also in the region. Next slide. It's quite striking. So if you look at some of the areas where we have invested across these three pillars that I've mentioned, what you find is a relatively low level of conflict events and also a low level of fatalities in comparison with those locations where you do not find investments around stabilization. There is a need for me to nuance this trend a little bit more. It is not necessarily causation. It is not stabilization is not necessarily allowing for or creating the conditions for reduced conflict. But one of the preconditions for deploying stabilization is working with security actors in ensuring that once areas are cleared by the National Security Forces or MNJTF, we are able to, as the development practitioners, make this sort of investment. So I would make the argument that what you find here is both a precondition for stabilization, but also a necessity for creating the foundation for sustaining low-level security on the ground. So it's an important point to make. So it's not causation, but it is correlation. So the fact that we're investing in these areas demonstrates that one of the main preconditions for that is low level of conflict events, which we see through the number of events, but also fatalities. But by making such investment, we can sustain this pattern of improvement in security conditions. And this is really profound in thinking about the impact of the work that we're doing on the ground. When we think about what this really means, you see a paradox. One of the areas where we have made massive investments in the Lake Chad Basin is what we've defined as super camps in a northeastern part of Nigeria. But what is striking there is that we are beginning to see that there are a number of probing attacks, not necessarily successful attacks, but probing attacks that are concerning. So in areas where these super camps are being established, we are seeing more and more probing, not necessarily successful, but more attacks to try and dislodge the communities. And one of the explanations for that, next slide, there are two main reasons why this is the case. The first is that these super camps generally offer their high value targets. And as a result, they are able to, investment are being made there. So they serve as that in itself is an incentive for Boko Haram to attack those locations. The second, and perhaps a more systemic explanation, is that even as we make those investments, there are still limited trust between the population and government in those locations. So I think reestablishing both, trust between the state and the citizen serves as an important foundation, and I'll come to that in the recommendation. Next slide. So in terms of the findings, what we can say over the last 2 years is that the stabilization facility, it seems to be, at least if we look at it from the perspective of correlation, we are seeing some positive results. Results around how we are, providing infrastructure, how we are contributing and promoting human rights in the region, and this general sense of improvement when it comes to supporting early warning and civilian engagement. But at the same time, what this demonstrates, if we are saying that there is a correlation between this sort of investment and at least improved security condition, is that it speaks to the well-documented evidence in the literature around the nexus between underdevelopment and fragility. And therefore, even as we think about the immediacy of stabilization, there is a need to also accompany that with a medium to long-term development investment. The last 2 points I want to make in terms of the findings is that, we are also seeing that in terms of the qualitative situation on the ground, we might have seen immediate gains in those JAP locations, but the overall situation in the Lake Chad Basin, as Ambassador Nuhu has mentioned, is still dire. There's still a need for support. There's still a need for international assistance. And therefore, as we think about the partial success of stabilization programming, we should also think about what can we do to ensure long-term development. And the last slide I have for you before I conclude is some of the recommendations. The first is what has often been a long-term conversation amongst policymakers. I hear that from the African Union and from other international partners around exit strategy. As we think about the immediate investment around stabilization, it is important that some of the structural causes of conflict are also addressed. So be it youth employment, ensuring that we create jobs, not just in terms of numbers, but in terms of the quality of jobs that we're creating in this region, improving livelihoods, supporting SMEs. These are investments that would offer a chance for sustainable peace. So stabilization, we see it as a bridge, but it is not in itself a solution. As we also think about this nature of the dominance of security interventions, I think policing matters. And this is something that we often don't think about in our discourse around security intervention. We need to begin to align military intervention in the Lake Chad with strong community policing. This is one way of enhancing community security. We also believe that by thinking about the linkages between MNJTF operations and stabilization programming in the region, we can do better in terms of ensuring that there is a strong alignment there. And we work very closely, of course, with under the leadership of Ambassador Nuhu on this. Rebuilding trust is essential. This is really winning the hearts and minds of local population, as we often say, is going to be extremely important. And it's not going to come by just making ad hoc investment. It's going to come from sustained engagement and relationship building with local population. And then, of course, we do this in a high-risk situation, risk to our own staff as well. And there is a need for us to factor that in how we do our programming, both now and for the future. But before I conclude, all of this is not being done in isolation. We have worked very closely with the LCBC under the leadership of Ambassador Nuhu, but also our partners have been funding this, and I would want to recognize the EU, Sweden, Ulla is on this call today, Germany, the Netherlands, and the African Development Bank. On that note, thank you so much, Bob, for the opportunity, and back to you.
Thank you very much. And I found that a very interesting study indeed, and with directly useful recommendations, I would have thought, for your partners in the process, and we can will no doubt hear some of those issues being picked up in the further panel comments. But may I pass now to Ali Rahim, Practice Manager, Social Sustainability and Inclusion for West Africa for the World Bank, to take forward the panel comments and discussions. And it's great to have you with us. Really appreciate your presence today. Over to you, Ali.
Great, thanks so much, Bob. Pleasure to be here, and thanks to Chatham House and also to our UNDP sponsor of this great series, and Ambassador Nuhu for framing the real challenges we face today. So, I think our keynote speaker and Mr. Okeke have sort of framed some of the key concerns we as sort of international actors are facing in these regions of West Africa, Lake Chad and beyond. In terms of our development challenge, I'll focus particularly on some of the challenges that Mr. Okeke also focused on in terms of regional stabilization, taking a regional approach to fragility, conflict, and violence. So my group at the World Bank, the Social Sustainability and Inclusion Division for West Africa, has sort of pioneered a new approach working with our counterparts and clients, including the Lake Chad Basin Commission, to combine what we call regional development diplomacy with local and community-based development efforts. So we'd like to say we think regionally and act locally. So what we've set up is an interlinked platform of 3 regional projects working with our regional integration window for Africa. Collectively, these platforms now total $1 billion and are working in some of the most acute, fragile, hot zones of West Africa. So we heard about the PROLAC project, which we work very closely with the Lake Chad Basin Commission, and thanks to Ambassador Nuhu's leadership on that. And that was the first of this series of projects. It's about a $370 million intervention that brings together the countries of the Lake Chad Basin, but then focuses on investments very much at the local level, looking at community-based investments, empowerment at the local level, inclusion of vulnerable groups, as well as bringing together countries around the development diplomacy efforts. Then we have the Community-Based Recovery and Stabilization Project for Sahel, which focus on the Liptako-Gourma region, which is the border area of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. And then going to our World Bank board, hopefully next month, is what we call the Gulf of Guinea Regional Stabilization Project, which is focusing on the northern belt of Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Togo, and Benin, which abuts the Sahel that is now experiencing the spread of the conflict across the border areas there. And that'll be a $450 million project. So the important thing about these projects is they're moving beyond our subnational or national level projects, looking at community-based investments, but still acting in those zones, but bringing together the actors and the leadership of the countries at multiple levels to identify and deal with these cross-boundary issues. We've seen, and you saw from some of those statistics, anywhere from 40 to 60% of conflict incidents in these zones is happening within 100 miles of these borders. So this really emphasizes approaching the root causes and drivers of fragility from a transboundary approach. We've long talked about these borderland issues, but we hadn't set up the modalities to develop projects, which were still very much being executed at a national level. But the reality is that the actual incidence of conflict, of course, the actual development needs, the social trust needs to be built at a local level. So the idea of these models, starting with PROLAC, was to develop an approach that could operate at multiple levels. So down to the village, up to whatever the local commune level was, through the subnational government entities, all the way up to national levels and regional institutions like the Lake Chad Basin Commission. The project we have in the Sahel works with an analog organization called the Liptako-Gourma Authority. And for the Gulf of Guinea, there isn't an equivalent regional institution, but we'll be setting up a secretariat that will work with different national institutions to set up a coordinating body to work on the coordination side of this. the drivers are common. We heard from Mr. Okeke about some of these: the lack of state presence, accountability, the lack of inclusion, low levels of connectivity in these border areas, a lot of the climate stresses we're seeing, especially with regards to transhumance routes in the Sahel. The agriculturalist and pastoralist conflicts are often flaring as a result. And so the reality is we want these programs to be regional because fragility doesn't respect national boundaries. The countries of West Africa have to find pragmatic ways of collaborating together, looking at cross-cutting and transboundary fragility issues. There is a lot of security collaboration happening, and what we were hearing from a lot of counterparts is security collaboration is essential, but we need an equivalent development diplomacy, which is lacking. But by the same token, that can't supplant the actual practical investments that people see on the ground. Our Vice President for Africa was recently in Benin and Togo and speaking with the presidents there. And he reported back to me and my team and our other colleagues here. They're saying the approach we're proposing here to do local investment and development is not unlike what they're seeing with the Islamic State of the Greater Sahel, which is going in, doing these kinds of local investments at a very local level, building a dialogue, coming in where there's a vacuum of the state, and offering concrete physical investments. So, we don't want to lose sight of the hardware of this, but there's also an important software that has to happen at each level. So all these projects very much follow a community-driven development approach. This is a project the World Bank, the UNDP, many other partners have used, and we heard about this from Mr. Okeke as well. But what we haven't done is do it in a regional way. So this is a bit of a pilot for us, and Ambassador Nuhu and the PROLAC project is actually the first to actually get under implementation. The Sahel project is following into implementation phase in the next couple of months. So it is somewhat of a novel approach, and it is somewhat untested at this scale. But we felt like we had to go to scale right away. We didn't have time. We've had smaller pilots. Some of our bilateral counterparts have had some smaller pilots. A lot of the PROLAC work was based on French program at a smaller scale in the PROLAC region. But the scale was necessary upfront with adaptability. So that's what these models allow. They're highly adaptable, but they allow scalable platforms from the outset. They build on existing national development programs. They build on local development planning. And so they also are very focused on the climate stresses. So these are also creating platforms for resilience and adaptation to climate change. We're seeing a potential of 4 degrees increase in the Sahel by the end of the century, potentially. You're seeing the climate-induced migration. We talked about the variation in transhumance routes, the competition for very scarce natural resources in areas that were also lacking in levels of agricultural productivity. So the platforms will also allow for sub-regional sharing of data and analysis on FCV drivers, modeling to see the intersection of FCV risks and climate risks, and the mainstreaming of the use of climate resilience filters in the participatory local development process. So all of these, I think, are important because we talked earlier before the panel started, the convergence of FCV and climate vulnerability is immense. And I think there are very few areas where the risks are more acute than in these hot zones of West Africa. So bringing these two agendas forward in a strategic way will be very important for these platform approaches. I'm glad to dive deeper into some of the individual projects, but I think I've given you sort of a broad snapshot of what we're trying to do. And it flows from what we've heard, obviously, from Ambassador Nuhu and Okeke. It involves many donors, many partners. These are platforms, so they allow us also to come together in a concerted way. And of course, we're very coordinated with a lot of our donor and multilateral partners on this work. And also within the bank with all the different sectoral engagements we have. These are effectively multi-sector projects, also from a World Bank. I'll just leave you with some of the challenges we face. There's a huge implementation challenge and absorptive capacity. There's a reason we're focusing on local level delivery. We want, the scale is large, but all the individual investments are actually can be quite modest. So this allows effects to be felt in a very localized way, which I think is very critical in terms of the nature of the conflict in these zones. But there's still an absorptive capacity issue, and we'll see how that plays out as these projects get implemented. And then the donor coordination and strategy. It is a challenge. We're all doing different things at different scales. To really make an impact at scale, we need to consolidate a lot of micro interventions into scalable, consolidated, and concerted interventions. In the long run, that'll be critical, which is why these platforms like the Governors Forum, the different forums under PROLAC that are being set up, and other projects are important, so that national leaders working with bilateral, multilateral actors can help shape a coordinated and consolidated intervention. So thanks again for this great panel. Very, very insightful views from everyone, and glad to be part of this conversation.
Thank you very much indeed. Very interesting. And it sounds to me extremely innovative, actually. I'd like to probe a bit more on this and in the discussion. Could I say to everyone that we're delighted to have as many questions as possible. So far, we haven't seen many written down in the chat. Please do, I think, from the first instance, put your questions into the chat, and we'll pick them up. Also raise your hands, please, if you'd like to be given the technical ability to do that personally. So finally, we'll go to our third member of the panel to comment on what's been an extremely interesting and forward-looking agenda so far. Ulla Andrén, it'd be great if you could give your views as you're head of the Regional Development Cooperation in Africa from Sweden, SIDA, the Swedish International Development Agency, and with a huge experience across the continent as well, working on issues of this sort. So most delighted that you're with us, and look forward to hearing your views. Ulla.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I guess I have been invited because Sweden has invested quite a lot in regional development in Africa, in particular in the Sahel, in Liptako-Burma, that one of my previous colleagues were speaking about, and in particular in the Lake Chad Basin. That will be the focus of what I will be talking about, and that Ambassador Nuhu and also my colleague Dido Okeke has talked a lot about. We are also working in the Horn of Africa with regional development. So to start with, just to state the obvious, that regional development planning and coordination is not easy. It requires a lot of hard work and persistence, and a lot of development cannot be planned, and also all actors doesn't want to be a coordinator. But a plan is always better than none, and as it gives you a direction, and you can adapt as you go along, and the unexpected happens. And trying to coordinate, even if you know it's not perfect, is always better than none, as development resources are scarce and must be used in the best possible way. I would like to dwell a little bit on the Lake Chad Basin Stabilization Program that is funded also by Sweden, and Ambassador Nuhu and Dido Okeke has talked a lot about. Because I find it very interesting that we are dealing with 4 countries on the shores of the Lake Chad. And the problems in borderlands are often that they are marginalized areas in the periphery and far away from capitals. And the shores of Lake Chad is no exception to that. And the governments of Chad, Cameroon, Nigeria, and Niger, they are far away from these borderlands and that are underdeveloped, and it's difficult for the people in the region to voice their concerns in the political life in the capitals. And it's not by accident, in my opinion, that Boko Haram and other violent extremist movements have been able to claim followers in these areas, where young people with aspirations do not see a future to realize their dreams. And therefore, the root causes and drivers of the problems must be addressed. And those includes, you're well aware, poverty, unequal distribution of wealth, marginalization, also climate stress, human rights abuses, and governance deficits. The Lake Chad Basin Regional Stabilization Program that has been described before has both national windows and a regional window. And the latter has been the focus of the support provided by Sweden. The Lake Chad Basin is an integrated region, and to improve human security and mobility, as well as cross-border trade, for the economy to prosper, cross-border activities are necessary. And the territorial action plans, as described by Ambassador Nuhu, they are fundamental for the 8 areas under different jurisdictions, and the cross-border activities are extremely important in a context where no physical or mental borders for the local communities really exist. The third Governors Forum in Yaoundé in October that was mentioned gave a very clear message from the governors. Cross-border cooperation provides a lot of opportunities and has a great potential to sustainable growth for the region. So regional development planning is key, as well as coordination. I believe that the current format with the Governors Forum and the Lake Chad Basin Commission is a good coordination mechanism. I think many lessons have been learned, and it's going from strength to strength. What is important that is there is an inclusive approach and efforts to involve all stakeholders. And that means local government with the support of national or federal structures, and the local communities, including the private sector and civil society. All must work together in this very difficult environment to see to it that there is a secure and developmental atmosphere. For the Lake Chad Basin Stabilization Program, I think also the international support group has been an important forum for donor coordination. For the stabilization efforts, the multinational joint task force and the military, but also the police and the local security forces are essential. For long-term security, it is, however, not only a question of physical security, because access to rule of law, upholding human rights and good governance must be there for peace and security to prevail, and it must get appropriate attention. And obviously the whole justice chain needs to be improved. If perpetrators from Boko Haram and other extremist groups are not brought to justice, the whole society will suffer for a very long period of time. Those who repent, their deeds can be reintegrated into the society, but others must be sentenced and liable to their crimes. In a society so much characterized by violence, women and children usually suffer the most. And it's therefore important that all efforts to bring peace and development take gender aspects into consideration, including conflict sensitivity analysis. Do no harm and leave no one behind is important in humanitarian as well as development work, but sometimes easier said than done. The regional development cooperation and coordination must take these issues seriously. Humanitarian interventions have the intention to be impartial and neutral and provide support to those in need. But in the eyes of the local population, in a polarized political situation, the perceptions are often that one side is favored more than the other. And this is a problem not only for humanitarian aid, but also for development projects. And the participation of local communities, local leaders and local government, business and civil society actors are therefore essential. And to have the discussions on options and ownership of solutions to problems. There is a Nigerian proverb that says, one must row in whichever boat one finds oneself. I think this goes for regional development planning and coordination. This means that you must be creative and work with the resources available, and you must be agile and adapt them for best possible results. So these were my few comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, that's very, very, very much appreciated. And it's very good to have that sort of cross reference to what is potentially working and what needs to improve. And I'm just thinking through what the questions might be that we'll start with now, because we're moving on to the Q&A session. We very much want to have as much interaction with our keynote speaker and the panel as possible. So I hope that you'll all four of you chip in as appropriate. We've got two questions at the moment. One from Caroline Vuillemin of Fondation Hirondelle, which I'll read out. Faced with multiple crises, political, humanitarian, climate and health, the population should be able to rely on reliable information to make decisions and share their concerns and solutions. What are the objectives of each institution in the panel to support freedom of expression and the work of independent media in your respective plans? In putting that question forward, I have noticed this focus on the need to build in community consultation and ownership, if at all possible, in sometimes quite complicated and new designs. So I'd welcome how important is, well, I think everyone's stressing the importance of the community participation and ownership, and indeed these principles just brought out in this question. How is it going at the moment? And have we seen improvements? And is this a key area to work on going forward? Would you like to comment first, Ambassador, on this?
Yes, with regard to community consultations, actually that is the cornerstone of the regional stabilization strategy. It was built from the grounds up. A lot of consultations at the grassroots level during its formulation. And what we were able to get at that level formed the basis of the eventual policies that we agreed upon in crafting the regional stabilization strategy. And that also underscores the importance of the governance forum that we have been talking about, because the governors are the closest to the people. They are in a position to feel the temperature at the grassroots level, to be able to understand and appreciate what is needed and what is not needed, what is working and what is not working in terms of our interventions. We also work very closely with civil society organizations. They too work closely with the grassroots to be able to help us take informed decisions with regard to the needs of the community. So I think our communities are sufficiently consulted when crafting the regional stabilization strategy, and those consultations are still going on at the level of governance forum. I don't know if I may.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Ambassador, going back to the question again, in your institution, the question was, does freedom of expression, the work of the media feature as an important element?
Yes, it is very important, but that is a national mandate. It's not a regional issue. Yeah, but it is absolutely very, very important. I totally agree with the person who asked the question. But we do not deal with the media issues at the regional level. That is left at the national level. So what I believe it is very, very important, and our member countries are doing their best to allow for freedom of expression in their various domains.
Great, thank you. We do have a question from Temitope Oriola, in the sense that he or she would like to raise this live and would like to pose the question to the speakers, the panelists live. So if you can facilitate that, let us ask Temitope.
Great, thank you very much. Temitope Oriola is my name. I am a professor of criminology and sociology at the University of Alberta, Canada. So first of all, thank you all, the keynote speaker, the ambassador, and the panelists for the extraordinary job that you're doing. I just wanted to find out, how do you measure success? What are the metrics? And how is the success of your efforts felt on the ground in the region? Thank you.
Quickly, well, I think Ambassador, that's firstly, I think, an interesting question for you, if you were able to answer.
Yes, the answer is very simple. As I've just said, we are in touch with the grassroots. We are in a position to correctly assess the impact of what we are doing through the feedback that we are receiving from the people, from the communities, from the civil society organizations. So that is how we measure we measure success in terms of our intervention. Thank you.
Would any of the other panelists like to come in on that one?
If I may, Bob.
Sure.
Yeah, a couple of things. Thanks to Temitope, extremely important question. But in addition to what Ambassador Nuhu mentioned, I would just want to highlight three ways that we...
Jide, your sound is a bit, it's echoing a bit. I don't know whether it's to do with the mic, maybe?
Can you hear me now? Is it better?
It's a bit better, but...
Oh, okay. I don't know whether the network is still the same. Well, in terms of success, we often do periodic perception surveys where we generally would ask ordinary citizens that are benefiting from our interventions on the ground what their sense is about, increased or improved security conditions in the region. And recently, we just concluded one in the northeastern part of Nigeria, where 87% of those that were in the JAP locations, which I referred to, which had benefited from stabilization, did mention that they felt that there was an improved sense of security following the investments that we made. I think that is quite profound in understanding the extent to which we are able to make a difference on the ground. Also, I think it's important that success is also measured against some of the indicators that we have set for ourselves. If you look at our around, basic services, infrastructure, community security, which we also often through our M&E tools tend to use as a way of determining to what extent we are making progress. In all of that, I can say there's been a growth in how we have been able to make those investments. And overall,
I think Jide, the quality of the sound is not brilliant, but I think we have managed to follow you hitherto, but I think perhaps we'll move on if you don't mind. But
absolutely fine.
Not at all. Thank you very much. It's very Very, very good to reply. Would any of the panelists, other panelists, Ali, would like to come in?
Sure. I think, it's quite similar to what Jide was saying in our sense as well. I mean, all these projects are designed with a strong development impact evaluation framework. We're looking both at so a lot here, we were talking about micro investments going into communities, a lot of which have not had investments. So it's actually measuring physical investments and the development outcomes related to them, whether it's water rehabilitation, whether it's restoration of agricultural areas like oasis lands in Niger. So there's the tangible physical investment side, there's the social cohesion side, for which we have some proxy indicators and also these kinds of perception surveys that UNDP also uses and other development actors. But I think that the one we're a little more hesitant is looking at causality with regards to preventing actual incidents of violence and conflict. I think there's so many exogenous variables here that we're not claiming attribution in our development results framework of whether our projects are actually direct. I think this is a long-term and complex systems type of phenomenon. So we're not actually looking at that in our formal framework, but over time, we will look on how this plays in this complex environment of factors.
Right. And Ulla, did you want to come out?
Yeah, if I might add, I think you have to look at this very much as a process, and we are talking about long-term processes. I mean, you cannot expect results from one year to another. It would be nice, because I mean, development aid is financed by taxpayers' money, and they want to know what is happening.
Exactly.
But we have to be realistic, and also what Ali was saying on the attribution. I mean, we are dealing with very complex issues, and development is not a right linear process. There is sometimes one step forward and two backwards. So we have to be very careful when we are looking at results.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much for that, everyone. And I see that Paul Melly has put his hand up and would like to pose the next question to our panelists and to our key speaker. So Paul, over to you if you could say who you are and pose your question. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Bob. Paul Melly here. I'm basically with the Africa program at Chatham House, focused on Sahel issues and right across the region. And I wanted to ask how in practice the administrations, particularly, for example, the regional administrations, or in Nigeria, the state administrations, actually cooperate with each other across borders on some of these practicalities. And just as an example, I mean, we've been doing a lot of work on Niger recently, and we've heard from various sources in Difa region that as the government there has begun to implement its program of returning displaced populations to the villages they had abandoned because of insecurity, whereas on the Niger side of the border, villages are becoming inhabited, life is resuming, there's a degree of settlement. Just across the border in Borno State in Nigeria, it's still effectively sort of bandit country, empty, most populations absent, sort of a free fire zone. So obviously, firstly, creating a situation of continuing insecurity or potential insecurity where Boko Haram or ISWAP can operate, but also limiting the potential for the reconstruction of social and economic life. So it would just be interesting to hear how much, not so much at the head of state or even the governor level, but at the actual practical administrative level of local public services, mayors, district leader, the heads of LGAs in Nigeria, public services, how that cross-border cooperation functions, if it does, and where the weaknesses are. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. I suspect the answer might be something that Ulla mentioned, which is it's not easy sometimes. But let us pose the question to the panelists. So, Ambassador, would you like to go first on that one?
Yes, well, in terms of regional cooperation, I will first of all look at it from the security point of view. That is why we have the multinational joint task force with its headquarters here in Jamena. All security issues are handled jointly in the immediate area, the area of operation of the MNJTF. It is not the entire affected area that is under the area of operation of the MNJTF. Beyond it, we have national operations going on. But the MNJTF coalition is working very well. It's receiving a lot of commendation. Of course, it's not perfect. There are still a lot of challenges, as you have rightly said. Boko Haram is hydra-headed. Just as you think you have solved the problem at this end, it will surface up in another end. And there are some elements of unpredictability in what is going on. But by and large, the multinational joint task force coalition is working very well. And at political level, a lot of achievement has also been made. It's at political level that we agreed on, for example, the right of hot pursuit, which enabled the troops from one country to cross the border in pursuit of Boko Haram. That had to be sorted out at political level because the summit of heads of states is there. They meet very regularly in order to iron out these issues at strategic levels. Then the chiefs of defense staff of the affected countries also meet regularly in order to address some of these problems. In terms of delivery of humanitarian and development services, we have also talked about the Governors Forum. Ula has talked about the regional, the cross-border cooperation that is going on between them. One very important achievement of the Governors Forum is the fact that the governors are now very close without necessarily having to refer back to the central government. They are able to meet very regularly. The governor of Borno State, for example, he has been traveling from one country to another. He was in Difa the other time. When we were in Yaoundé for the Governors Forum, they crossed by road along with Cameroonian dignitaries into the Nigerian territory and continued their dialogue there. So there is a lot of interaction, there's a lot of collaboration going on, but it's not perfect. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. I think we've got time for one further question, perhaps live from Undubwizi Unwokolo, who has put his hand up, would like to pose this question live.
Yeah.
Can we facilitate it? Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. My name is Undubwizi Unwokolo. I'm the managing partner and chief executive Next Year SPD, which is an international development firm based in Nigeria. My question has to do with the issue of stabilization. I heard when Jide was talking about the JAP and as well as the RSS, which incidentally I participated in some of the validation workshop. So my question is, how are we, in terms of programming, how are we putting in the gap between what we have before the outbreak of this conflict and the program we're doing now? Because if you look at stabilization, let's say in Afghanistan, and stabilization in the Lake Chad region, they are not likely to be the same. You might look at stabilization where maybe what you're looking at are just issues of insecurity, and you're trying to provide the security that is needed, to a situation where nothing was actually working before the conflict broke out. You know that the gap will be much, and while you're trying to do all these things, it might take you more time than a situation where maybe those things were in existence, but the insecurity or the conflict came up and you're not trying to deal with it. So my question is, how has these things been put in the program, in the RSS program, to make sure that they are delivered as when due or as is planned? Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's a focus on the RSS program. Would you like to pick that one up, Ambassador?
Yes. Now the RSS includes a mapping of all the past, ongoing, and planned interventions in the Lake Chad region. That way, we are able to keep track of the activities that are going on in the region. The first part of the mapping was done, but it was not complete. As I don't know who observed among the panelists, it is not easy to get partners to collaborate, to cooperate in providing the necessary information on their activities, on what they are doing in the region.
I'm good.
But there are attempts to do that, and I totally agree with you. We need to find out exactly who is doing what in the area. But that is part of what the regional stabilization strategy is doing. And we also have, we are setting up at the level of Lake Chad Basin Commission here, a partner coordination forum. We have just drawn up the terms of reference for it, and early next year we're going to launch it, because we have realized, as has been observed by Ali, that donor coordination is an issue in the areas. It is indeed an issue, and we are trying to address it at this level. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. I think we have almost come to the end of our time. Today's discussions were taken up by some really substantive presentations. So I don't think that the slight truncation of the Q&A has at all affected the quality of this discussion. I wonder if I could use the remaining minutes or ask you, the keynote speaker and the three panelists, to perhaps reflect on having made your presentations, having had various questions. Could you just very succinctly say, what do you think has been working and what needs improvement? And thirdly, do you see more impetus collectively now in this process going forward? If you could answer those three questions within your final comments, and please feel free to make any final comments, that would be, I think, very interesting for us all. First of all, if I may pass to you, Ambassador.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, I would say what is working is the cooperation and collaboration among the partner organizations within the Lake Chad Basin, especially among the member countries of the Lake Chad Basin. There is the determination to see things work. We have been able to break barriers that had existed before now. That has been achieved, and the cooperation is very commendable. But as I said, we still have a lot of work to do. We have funding challenges. There are a lot of things that we want to do, but unfortunately we cannot do that because of problem of funding. We are constrained by lack of funds. I think that is what I would want to say at this moment. Thank you.
Great. So I can't see our UNDP colleague just for the moment. So Ali, would you like to take up the mic and your final reflections, including perhaps on those few questions that I posed?
So what's been working, I think we're seeing a pivot to the regional reorientation of dealing with these transboundary issues, which were very nationally focused as well. And we're seeing the development piece very decisively enter into the dialogue in a way it wasn't, particularly in West Africa. What we're lacking is, LCBC and similar organizations have really stepped forward, but like the ambassador said, they need great support to get their capacity and resourcing to a point where they can deal with issues this complex and at this scale. So, I mean, I think LCBC, as an example, has made commendable gains and taken strategic leadership, but they need great support. And then it's about us as the donor and multilateral community coming together. We all have different sets of incentives, different ways of operating, different levels of scale. And we really do need to find ways to bring that in convergence. And so, more and more of these platforms to convene us together that are being set up will be critical.
Can I ask a quick question on that? Is there anything else that can be done on that? Because it is an internal issue.
Sure. So I'll give an example. We have these high-level Lake Chad Basin Commission gatherings at the World Bank annual meetings. I've been to many of them now. At that level, it's great, the conversation, but this needs to cascade down to the actual delivery. And that's, I think, where the break often comes. The political dialogue will happen or the operational dialogue will happen. What we fail often is it doesn't always cascade up and down. And so then in the actual delivery and execution, that's often where the practicalities of coming together are missed.
Thank you. That's an interesting point. Thank you. And I'm not sure if Jide is there yet. He had connectivity issues, I think, so unfortunately may not be with us.
Can you hear me?
Oh, Jide, you can do now. Yes.
Yes, better. Yeah. What is working? Unprecedented level of donor interest in the region. I think it's something that needs to be acknowledged, irrespective of the fact that it's not necessarily translated into the scale of resources that we would like to see in terms of investment, but we have seen sustained donor interest. I think that is something that should be built upon and we should leverage. In terms of what could work better, I think given the nature and the fluid nature of the security environment and the political context in the region, the consistent political support that is required to do successful development programming is one that we can consistently work better on. So I would say that if you look at what has happened over the last 12 months in the Lake Chad Basin region, it has really affected how we engage with political stakeholders on the ground. And here, I do believe that we can consistently work with our political actors to do better. The last point I would want to make is that civil society matters. We need to engage with the civil society in the region, not necessarily outside of the region, to see how we can harness their potential, support their platforms, and use them as the basis for transformation in the Lake Chad Basin region. Back to you.
Thank you very much. And finally, Ulla, over to you.
Yeah, I very much agree with what has been said. I think the Governors Forum, I have attended 2 of them myself. I think it's a great success, and it was a fantastic improvement in Yaoundé compared to the one in Niamey when it comes to the cooperation between the governors. And this is extremely important when it comes to the cross-border activities. They must coordinate amongst themselves, and I think they are getting there. Also, the cooperation between donors, I think, has been good. What can be improved? I mean, I think everything can be improved. But particularly, I want to mention the local communities and their voices to be heard. It's very, very important. I mean, this is not anything that should be topped down. It's for the lives and the livelihoods of the people in these regions that we are working. Going forward, I would like to see less humanitarian aid and more development aid, because working with the development and the root causes of this whole situation in Lake Chad Basin is, in my opinion, the way forward. Prevention is better than cure. That's an old saying, and I think it's valid also for Lake Chad Basin. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. And I think those wise words very well encapsulate the session that we've had. So thank you very much to all of you panelists, and thank you very much to everyone out there for your participation. I'm sorry that not all your questions were able to be brought to the panel, but I think I've been struck by some of the language used in the categorization of the interest in this important area of the world. And I think it is very encouraging if there is unprecedented interest, if there are new mechanisms that are now being worked through. They may be complicated. They're trying to be inclusive of both of the regional and the national and the local and very important community aspects of taking forward development and the needs of the people working forward. This idea also that maybe one is at the cusp of moving really from humanitarian into more development-focused activities must be a healthy sign for future evolution in a very complicated and difficult situation and area. I would like to say special thanks to Ambassador Mamman Nuhu, Executive Secretary of the Lake Chad Basin Commission, for your presence today, to Jide Okeke of UNDP, to Ali Rahim, and to Ola Andrean, all of you for your time, for all that you are doing and continue to do in partnership to help the people of this area and the future of this area. And thank you very much for your words of wisdom at the end and during the discussions. Do keep safe, all of you, keep well, and we do hope to see you soon again at Chatham House. Thank you very much indeed.